Well, this week, France's security agency sent a memo to defense companies warning them to be on the lookout for potential foreign spying, notably from Russia. Among the signs they tell employers to watch out for are if one of their employees starts a new romantic relationship, particularly with a foreigner. Numerous Russian spy rings have been uncovered since the start of the war in Ukraine. For more on the issue, we can speak to Philip Ingram, a former British military intelligence officer and a journalist specializing in security issues. Good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Good morning.
First, just how unusual is a memo like this one from France's security agency? Is it sort of a sign that there's a growing threat?
Well, the threat has always been there, but I think we're seeing security agencies and intelligence agencies from different countries around the world starting to come out of the dark. They used to try and keep all of these things very quiet and very hidden, but it's important that they warn industry in particular of the threat that always has been there and is growing.
And why is that? I mean, have there been kind of specific cases where there have been weaknesses revealed in certain companies?
There's a large number of specific cases, and it's not just the Russians, it's the Chinese as well. You just have to look at the massive military parade that was in China earlier on in the week and look at the similarities between the pieces of equipment that were on parade and Western military pieces of equipment, because a lot of the plans have been stolen and have just been copied. And with the war in Ukraine, that has increased the threat to defense companies across Europe, in France and elsewhere, because the Russians will want to try and identify how European defense capacity is increasing, what the new weapons are that are potentially coming out, and to try and influence that production in any way they can. And they'll use traditional espionage methods as well as some of the newer ones in cyberspace.
You're saying that breaches have already happened. When they do occur, is that something that's made public, or is it also kind of kept quiet because it's embarrassing for the countries?
A lot of the time it's kept quiet. From an intelligence perspective, the best thing that you can do is not let your enemy know that you have compromised their means. You can turn that round to your advantage and potentially feed disinformation into it. I have done that when I worked for a defense contractor after getting out of the military, and I found it quite interesting going to see a rival country's defense contractor having copied something that we had on our booth, but they copied the flaws that I had deliberately cut in it as well. So you can use this to your advantage as well as understanding the threat.
Can you talk a bit about some of the tactics that tend to be used? I mean, this memo from the French security agency talked about romantic relationships, for example, with foreigners.
Well, the traditional tactics of espionage from James Bond movies will still happen. So it's compromising the individual in a way that gets them to pass information across that they wouldn't ordinarily do. So you can compromise through romantic relationships, through identifying people who have got themselves into debt, and you exploit that through the use of people who are using drugs or other inappropriate behavior. And that's the good old-fashioned methods. But also you're finding that people are getting compromised in cyberspace. So whenever they are on social media or whenever they're in gaming platforms and elsewhere, they provide further opportunities. The threats are in any way that someone can be groomed, compromised, or otherwise, for whatever reason, the intelligence agencies will be using it.
You talked about online spying. There are also, cyber attacks often carried out by Russian groups. Can you talk about the relationship between those and the Russian government?
Yeah, there's an awful lot of cyber groups operate out of Russia, and that's because Russia's got two rules. One, no Russian national can be extradited out of Russia to face charges in another country. That's in the Russian constitution. The second thing is illegal groups that operate operate in Russia can operate under the protective umbrella of the different oligarchs that support the government that run every business that there is in Russia. And cyber criminal gangs can operate like and do operate like large businesses, but they pay a tax, and that tax is either cash to the oligarch that is protecting them, or it is activity on behalf of the state in many cases. So the Russian intelligence agencies will subcontract them to carry out plausibly deniable cyber attacks to try and gain advantage in the cyber world against lots of different industries, including defense industry. It's very, very sophisticated.
And we have seen numerous Russian spying rings kind of unveiled in recent years. Has the war in Ukraine been somewhat of a wake-up call to Western powers about Russian spying?
Yeah, the war in Ukraine is a massive wake-up call. The West, Europe, got very complacent after the end of the Cold War, and the Berlin Wall came down, and everyone assumed that Russia was coming into the fold and would be a good international partner and would participate in the new world order. It didn't. It kept its level of espionage and spying going, and in fact, in many cases, because it saw economic advantages of getting good old traditional intelligence, it increased its spying activity. But our intelligence agencies took their eyes off that particular ball as we focused on the growth in Islamic terrorism. Now people have realized that actually the Russians are well embedded in many of our different countries and different companies, and we have to be much more aware of the threat.
And Russia goes to incredible lengths to embed spies. I was reading about a spy ring uncovered in Brazil with Russians who spent years in Brazil posing as Brazilians. Can you talk a little bit more about that tactic?
Oh, it's a tactic that is used. It's using clean skin, so people who have no necessary connection to Russia or direct connection to Russia, and locals will be recruited. They'll be groomed over a period of time. They may not know that they're being groomed by Russian intelligence services, and then they're compromised into a position where they're having to work for them, and they will, in many cases, be in position in communities for years, for decades, before they're actually activated to go and gather information. So, someone who is working into a company, some of the best routes into different companies are through the cleaning companies that are gain access into there, through the personal assistant to the chief executive, to the driver, for the directors in different companies. The Russians will spend years trying to identify key people that they can compromise, and then start to run them as agents. And very often they are not national Russians. They could have other Eastern European backgrounds, or they could even have French or British or German or home country backgrounds.
How do governments tend to uncover those spies?
Well, that's the intelligence game. There are networks of agent handlers who are out recruiting the spies, who are controlling them, who are grooming them. So our intelligence agencies know what to look for. And then it's looking for unusual behaviors within different companies and different organizations. So, is someone accessing data that they shouldn't necessarily have? And of course, we've got our intelligence agents that are reporting inside the intelligence agencies of those countries that we consider as hostile. And very often they turn around and say, identify the fact that there is a leak in this particular government department or this particular company. And then that leak is followed through by very clever counterintelligence operations.
It's fascinating stuff. As you said, definitely fit for a Bond movie. Philip Ingram, thank you again so much for joining us this morning. That was Philip Ingram, a former British military intelligence officer and a journalist specializing in security issues.